Welcome to the first episode of Mental Notes with Matt. Today, I'm joined by someone who's not just a thoughtful clinician, but someone who I've known personally outside of all this. Sarah Wolfson is a licensed social worker, a former special education teacher, and currently a clinical therapist working with teens and adults through a range of challenges, from trauma and grief to parenting and daily life stressors. In her work, she draws from a variety of therapeutic approaches, including cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and internal family systems to help clients feel seen, supported, and empowered. But what I've always admired most about Sarah is her presence. She's direct, grounded, compassionate, and unapologetically herself. This episode isn't just about therapy. It's about what it means to talk about mental health from both a personal and professional lens, and to do it honestly with someone who doesn't just do the work but lives it. Sarah, thank you so much for being here and joining me on this very first episode. Let's get right into the conversation. So you've had such a layered journey from working as a special education teacher to supporting clients as a therapist. What do you feel connects all of those roles at the core?
I think for me, the most obvious connection between not just my teaching experience and my role as a therapist, but really all of the roles that I have been involved in throughout the span of my life is that they are helping professions. And at the core, it's the desire to add value, right? The value being human connection and the idea that relationships are the single most protective factor in the wellness of all human beings. And I remember teaching and feeling like delivering the academic content was the least important job I had in the classroom. These kids couldn't even access the curriculum much of the time because of all of the environmental and social barriers. I worked with some really challenging kids that people might objectively label as bad or difficult, problem children. And what I recognized rather quickly was that their needs just weren't being met. Basic needs, right? Shelter, food, safety. And if your basic needs are unmet or undermet or inconsistently met, how can anyone expect that you're going to show up to a classroom and be ready to learn? Have you tried to focus when you're hungry?
Right.
Yeah, no, I can't do it. Or tired or afraid. It's really difficult. I think the connection for me that led me to get my second master's in social work is really the framework that all social workers, kind of the lens in which we work through, which is the view that human behavior exists in person and environment, right? So what that means simply is that we all exist as part of larger environments, your family, your community, etc. And that environment has implicit and explicit implications for how you're going to perceive yourself, others, and the world. And our perceptions impact our behaviors.
Absolutely. That's terrific to hear you say all that. I mean, what resonated immediately with me is, the human aspect and wanting to connect with people. And I think that, like you were saying, with working with children that have deficits, I think that there are a lot of people that don't allow themselves to go there to understand that they are coming from this place where they do need different needs than we do. And I think it takes a really special person to kind of devote their life to wanting to understand people better and to wanting to be the helper. So it's amazing the work that you do, and it's clear that you have an impact. Has your view of emotional support changed between the classroom and the therapy room?
I don't think so. I think I've always believed that the simplest and most impactful gift was the gift of emotional support, both in how we show compassion for ourselves and how we convey that compassion to others.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things I've always appreciated about you is how clear and direct you are, even in tough conversations. And I imagine you're having tough conversations constantly being a clinician. Do you think that quality is something that you've always had, or did it grow out of your experiences working with people in crisis?
I mean, if you ask my mother and my childhood teachers, absolutely. I've always been a pretty straight shooter, and I've rarely been afraid to speak my mind. I think as I've gotten older, I have had to learn ways to soften the blow and to drive home the message in a way that takes into account my audience and my goals for the conversation. Certainly, as a therapist, I have to toe the line between what I might tell my girlfriends in a conversation and how I engage with my clients.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, would you say that personality is relatively fixed throughout your life? I mean, you're saying that growing up, you've always kind of had that tendency to be very direct. And sure, certainly over time, your life experience and different audiences, you know how to kind of temper what your responses are. But do you believe that personality is generally pretty fixed?
I think there are certainly parts of personality that are fixed. We are born with a temperament, right? That's innate. And then I think how that kind of expresses itself throughout your life can depend on, again, your experiences and interactions. But for me, I have been pretty consistently who I am. And it's not something I deliberately or intentionally think about.
Yeah, it comes naturally. It kind of flows out of you in the way that it does. So moving on now, you work with people going through heavy life stuff like grief, trauma, daily overwhelm. I mean, we're living in a very unpredictable time. So when someone is feeling totally emotionally stuck, where do you even begin to have that conversation?
I always begin wherever someone's at, right?
Right.
People truly need to be met exactly where they are. There is this human desire, I think, to fix it, right? Especially when you really care about somebody. They're struggling, okay, here's what you need to do or what you should do. But that's not how therapy works, right? When someone is stuck, and many people are, you have to sit there with them
Yeah.
right in the stuck. And it's probably the most uncomfortable part of it, at least for me, right? I think many therapists would agree. But when you are sitting in that stuck energy, and you might have a variety of solutions, and you can't, and you have that propensity, that need to be like, oh, just do this, right? Maybe if I was with my friends, I would scream, like, leave him, he's a bum, right?
Yeah.
you know you can't do that when you're in session. It's not solving the problem, because what it does is it takes away someone's ability to be empowered and to
Yes.
make difficult decisions. So I think the hardest but also the best place to start is just sitting there right in that emotion.
I love that. I love that. And that's the exact word I was thinking as you were saying that was empowerment. We want to make the person come to that conclusion on their own and empower them to understand through this kind of back and forth and trust that you develop with this unbiased person that can kind of see the whole picture. But I totally agree that there's that impulse to want to just shake the person sometimes and say, do this, but it's not up to us and we're not living in their true life experience. So having that patience, I'm sure, is something that can be difficult at times, but also extremely gratifying when the person is able to grow based on that back and forth and kind of learning on their own.
Yeah,
So that's really great. Yeah.
yeah, it's a really powerful process, I think. And with that, it can be excruciating and also painful, right? But that is how people grow. And oftentimes I have people coming to me and they're like, I need you to tell me what to do. I don't know what to do, Sarah. Like, you're the professional. And what I usually find is that people know what to do, right? It's buried under all of this fear and anxiety and all of the what ifs. And if we can kind of manage those expressions, those protective kind of reactions, we can get to the place where they know.
Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that so much. And it's almost like they are looking for validation in some way from someone that's outside of themselves. And you're right. I think in a lot of cases, people already know, but it's kind of like they're looking for that person to affirm what they're already thinking they need to do, or to push them to be more accountable to themselves. But again, it really does come down to the person making those decisions, and you're there to help guide them. which I think is just such an important thing that you do. And so on that note, there is this world we live in now where therapy speak is everywhere, and people use these words like trauma and gaslighting and attachment style and all this stuff. What's your take on all of that? Do you think it's helping to normalize mental health, or is it creating confusion? Is it minimizing diagnoses and things like that? Like, what's your take?
Hot take. I find it to be super problematic. Look, I appreciate that mental health is an active conversation. I think that was not always the case. And so when it's kind of broadly being spoken about, that's always a positive thing. But I think along with that, and especially with social media,
Sure.
comes kind of like a hostile takeover of mental health and diagnoses, right? Not everyone who's an asshole is a narcissist.
Right.
Not everyone who's experiencing emotional instability is bipolar.
Mhm.
Not everyone who is sad is depressed. There are very specific criteria that need to be met in order to consider such diagnoses. And so you go on TikTok and you do what I do sometimes, doom scrolling, and I'm just like, I'm partially horrified by what is going on. And then you think about who is accessing this material, right? Kids, teenagers. And so it becomes kind of like it dilutes therapy, right? Therapy is a scientific, research-based establishment that goes all the way back to, early studies of human behavior and how humans interact. And I think it's certainly not perfect. There is no science that is, but when it's kind of co-opted by the average person who has a platform, and literally anyone can have a platform now, it becomes almost dangerous.
Totally agree. Yeah. And hey, listen, I'm living proof. I've put myself on a platform now, and I don't have. I'm not a licensed therapist, so I'm constantly trying to make myself aware of the fact that I'm not an expert in this. I know what I know. I know what life experience I've had, but I do think that I try really hard to not behave as though I know everything. It's more about I want to learn as much as possible from other people, about what it is that's going on for me, why my experiences are shaping me to feel the way that I am.
But listen, like things like this, right? These conversations are proactive, productive, and wonderful. I think and I think the disclaimer is important, right? Like I am a licensed therapist, and anything that I'm saying on this podcast or when I'm on social media, like it comes along with it. Like, this is not my professional advice, right? Like, I'm talking to a Sarah. I'm just a civilian here, right?
Right.
And even when I'm in my sessions, I'm not the expert in the session because you are, right? My clients, I tell them all the time, you know yourself better than I know you. So I'm not going to sit here and start rattling off parts of the DSM or, this theory posits what it doesn't, right? Like I use that to kind of inform how I'm structuring sessions, but I'm no expert. I'm over here just trying to figure out how to survive life too, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, we're all in the same boat. At the end of the day, none of us are getting out of this place alive.
No.
Uh, so, so for people that do care deeply about emotional health, but don't have that clinical training, what's something that they can do to engage with other struggles without overstepping? Where's that line between support and then that pseudo therapy that we sometimes see all over social media?
Yeah. I think again, it's important that people show compassion and empathy for others. We are living in an incredibly dark time with a lot of fear and hatred that's being stoked. And
Sure.
support for people looks different. And even for the same person, support looks different depending on what's happening, right? So I think the most simple thing that anyone can do is ask, how can I support you? Do you need my advice or do you need to vent? I'm here, right?
That's great. That's a really great approach. I love that.
I also want to, I also want to say that showing up for your friends and giving good advice is not the same as therapy, right? It can be therapeutic in the same way that going for a walk outside, reading a good book, laughing with your friends, those are all therapeutic, activities. Something being therapeutic is not the same as going to therapy. On that note, going to therapy is not the end all be all of your
Right.
mental
Right.
health, right? It's
Right.
important in that it creates this safe space for someone to process whatever it is they might be going through. It improves insight, coping skills. But therapy is a relationship, and relationships can be healing. But just going to therapy isn't the work, right? You have to be honest and willing to do the work. And usually that work is done largely outside of session.
Wow. Yeah, it's very true. You don't just check in and check out for your therapy
I
session
mean, some
and then you're
people
done.
do, right? And
For
then they're like,
sure.
I'm in therapy. And it's
Right.
like, what are you doing in there?
Yeah. How are you taking those insights that you've learned about yourself and bringing that into the real world to help you to grow and evolve and be the person that you want to be?
Yeah, and listen, like, don't get me started. That's another podcast about how people lie to their therapists, right? And
Sure.
it's like they're lying to themselves. And so therapy is really kind of what you make of it, How deeply do you want to work on patterns that have existed throughout the span of your life, right?
Yeah. That's excellent. You're right. So the last one, how do you, Sarah, take care of your own mental health when you're supporting everyone else's? What helps you feel grounded?
Well, I'm going to be honest. It's tough. I see about 25 clients a week,
Hmm.
and on my longer days, I definitely find it harder to refill my cup. I try to pay attention to how I'm feeling without a ton of judgment. And, I learned a long time ago that no is a complete sentence. And the ability to say no is self-care. Um,
Yes.
Other than that, I like to be outside. I like to binge a good Netflix series. I spend time with my children and my dog,
Mhm.
people that make me feel good. But I'm a human, right? So, and I tell my clients this pretty regularly. Just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean that I execute any of what I know perfectly. In fact, I have some really hard days where I look at myself like, aren't you a therapist? What are you doing? Right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just try to remember and to remind my clients that like I'm just a human and I'm a human first, and we're all just trying to figure it out, right? So I want to normalize that for everyone is that there is no scenario in which you just nail it every single day, all day. That's not it,
Yeah.
right? You pay attention. You try not to judge and you try to make yourself feel a little bit better. And that's going to be harder some days.
Yeah. And to recognize that this is a moment in time and your life is a series of all of these moments, and how you are feeling right now or how things are going right now isn't necessarily how things are going to be forever.
Nothing lasts. Nothing
Nothing lasts
lasts
forever.
forever, right? Good times, bad times. And I think like I remind my clients often that your feelings are not facts,
Mhm.
right? And so people will kind of often be like, I'm anxious. I'm anxiously attached. I'm, you know, whatever. And it's like, no, that's how you feel, right? And so let's talk about that. And let's also consider that feelings come and they go.
Yeah, I love that. Also, people declaring exactly what they are,
Hmm.
and convincing themselves of that, it kind of puts them in a box, and it makes it a little bit difficult to step outside of that because you believe so, wholeheartedly that that's who you are and how you're
Yeah.
made. Yeah,
And I think people love a box. We do this
sure.
all the time, right? It's
Naming something is somewhat satisfying, you know,
mhm.
but it's not necessarily the whole story, which I think is the gist of that.
Right.
Well, these are all incredible insights. Sarah, thank you so much, not just for showing up with your clinical insight, but for showing up as you. I think this conversation is a really great reminder that mental health work isn't just about having the right credentials, it's about showing up with as you say, empathy, with clarity and the willingness to hold space for the messy and complicated stuff. So if you are listening and something in this episode resonated, I'd love if you followed the show, shared it with someone who might need to hear it, or just took a moment to reflect on your own mental notes today. Until next time, thanks for listening.